welcome back to my channel Gabbabetic. Today's video is my top 5 tips or habits for managing celiac disease. If you've watched my channel before, you'll know that I've been celiac for a very long time, nearly 14 years now, and I've been on a strict gluten-free diet since then. Celiac disease is more than just an allergy to gluten, it's an autoimmune condition too. So I thought I'd make this video today, share my top 5 habits and tips to help anyone who's trying to manage celiac disease or anyone who wants to know more about it. I hope you like this video. If you do, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing if you're new to the channel. I will mention this video is my top 5 habits or tips for managing celiac disease, and next week I will bring one out for managing type 1 diabetes. I think both are as equally important, so I wanted to make sure I had a separate video for both just to share how important these tips are. But let's get started. Okay, so my first tip is for dining out with celiac disease. Honestly, things have gotten a lot better since I was diagnosed in 2009. There's definitely a lot more options when you're eating out, so that's really great. But I will say you cannot assume that there will definitely be gluten-free options. So my first tip is to be prepared. Ring ahead to wherever you're going to eat out and ask them are there gluten-free options, or check the menu online for gluten-free options. Look at the allergens that are in the meals. Even though it's 2022, you can't just assume that there will be gluten-free options because some places just don't do them. And then sometimes they're very limited, like there might only be 1 or 2 things. For example, they may only have a gluten-free salad. A salad is not what I want when I'm going to go and eat out and pay out to eat at a restaurant. So that doesn't suit me. So I would be really disappointed if I went somewhere and the only gluten-free option was something like a salad. I wouldn't like that. So that's why it's definitely better to ring ahead. Make sure that there's something that is gluten-free first of all, and secondly that you like, that you will look forward to eating and enjoy. Things have definitely gotten a lot better, but I still think there's far to come. So that is my first tip. Number 2 then, one of the main things about celiac disease is not just eating gluten-free, it's about being aware of cross-contamination. For anyone who doesn't know what that means, if I had something gluten-free but it was in contact with something not gluten-free, even though I'm not eating the not gluten-free thing, they've been in contact, so they are contaminated, so that could still make me sick and damage the intestines. That's how sensitive celiac disease is. So my tip number 2 then is to cook things that are gluten-free and not gluten-free separate, so not to confuse yourself. It's very easy to get confused. Say if you were cooking a gluten-free pasta and a not gluten-free pasta at the same time, separate pots, they need to have separate utensils to not contaminate. Very easy to put the spoon from the regular gluten-full pasta into the gluten-free and just contaminate the whole pot. That is from personal experience, so that has happened. You have to be very careful of what utensils you're using, what pots you're using, what's touching what, and what water is splashing into another pot. So my top tip to manage this is to just, if you're cooking gluten-free and non-gluten-free, just cook them separate so that you don't get confused, because the last thing you want to do is have a meal and make yourself sick when you've gone to all of the effort. Tip or habit number 3 then is to check labels on products very carefully. Gluten can be disguised as other terms. For example, it can be gluten, cereals, wheat, rye, oats, barley. There's a lot of different names for gluten, and especially when you're newly diagnosed celiac, you don't know what you can have and what you can't have. You're just looking for gluten maybe. So first of all, be very careful and aware of the different terms for gluten. Also on the labels, a product may look okay. It may only have an allergen for milk, for example, and that looks okay, there's no gluten in there. You have to be very careful for the may contain. Usually it's like the ingredients list and then under it will say the may contain, and often this may contain will say gluten. So that could mean the product is made in a factory that's made on a line that handles gluten. I personally avoid those. I don't want something that was in contact with gluten that might make me sick. It's not worth it. So that's another area of the labels to watch out for. Definitely check for that may contain. For example, here is a packet of Irish crisps. When you read the ingredients, it looks okay. It only says milk is the main allergen. Then when you look on this last line, may contain traces of soya and barley. So definitely a place to be aware of on the labels. Another thing then to be aware of is that products often update their ingredients and allergens. This has happened to me with something, it was a packet of crisps that I just assumed was gluten-free because I had it before. And then I didn't really feel great, checked the label and saw that there was wheat in it. And that was because they had updated the ingredients. So even if you've had something, always double check before you eat it. Like if you've had something multiple times, do check again, because often they do update the allergens or the ingredients and that can catch you out. That's really disappointing, first of all, to be sick, and second of all, for one of the things that you really like to have gluten in it and make you sick. So unfortunately, with celiac disease, it is a case of constantly being aware, constantly checking those labels. One last great tip on this topic I will mention is that often the societies have handbooks that you can buy. I am a member of the Coeliac Society of Ireland. They send out a handbook every year and it lists all of the gluten-free products. So you could use that if you were newly diagnosed, or if you just wanted to know what products were gluten-free when you're shopping. Look through it and see what's safe for you. So do check that out, whichever Coeliac Society is in your country. There's probably something like that, but they are very useful, I will say that. I talked about the importance of cooking things separately in habit or tip number 2. This tip is also to do with being gluten-free at home. You should 100% buy yourself your own separate toaster. You need a gluten-free toaster if you have celiac disease and you want to have bread that's toasted. I have my own. My boyfriend has a separate toaster here. Yes, we have 2 toasters in the house. The reason being is that if someone comes along and puts gluten-full regular bread into the toaster, the crumbs will fall into that and it will be contaminated. So then if you come along and put in your gluten-free bread that you've gone to all the trouble of finding it and you want to toast it, it's contaminated and it's very high chance that that will make you sick. This has happened to me in the past, so trust me on that. You need to have a separate toaster. I label mine, I put my name on it and everything so that no one gets confused and uses it by mistake. I write gluten-free toaster, Ava, on it. You might think that's a bit much, but honestly it's really good because then no one gets confused as to what's what. So definitely have your own gluten-free toaster. Another thing that I would say to get is your own butter or spreads that you want to use. Similarly to the toaster issue, if someone comes along with full gluten bread, they butter their toast using the butter and then they stick that knife full of the regular gluten full crumbs into the butter. That butter is contaminated, so when you go to use that to butter your gluten-free toast, you're bringing all of those crumbs full of gluten onto your bread and you're contaminating it. So you need to be really aware, and that's the same for like any spreads or anything like that's a jar or butter or spread that you're dipping a knife in and spreading it on something that's full of gluten. That is one thing I would say, get separate things. I have my own butter as well. It has my name on it too, and this is just one of those things that makes celiac disease much easier to manage. If you just have your own things, your own toaster, your own butter, your own jam, label them up so no one gets confused, because you don't want to be thinking that you're safe and you're eating the right things and then you're feeling sick later on and then you realize, oh, someone contaminated it. And how sensitive celiac disease is honestly that one crumb can cause so much damage. So it's worth investing in. And people may ask you, why do you have 2 toasters? But that's fine, and that's kind of coming on to my last and final habit. So my last point is to tell people that you have celiac disease. Make them aware that it is celiac disease. It's an autoimmune condition. It's more than just a food allergy. Like, cross-contamination is extremely important, and especially if you live with people, make sure to tell them so that they don't use your stuff that's labeled gluten-free, they don't use your toaster, so that they know the reason behind it and that they understand it, that you need these things to make you healthy. I always tell, like, obviously my family know, my friends know, even in work, I make sure I tell them they're in work, because I don't want someone to eat anything gluten-free on me, or I don't want someone to contaminate any of my gluten-free things if you're putting your lunch in work, for example. And it's just easier when people know, because some people actually will make a lot of effort and they'll bake gluten-free things and bring them in if they're bringing in cakes, for example, for a birthday and stuff. I think you would be surprised, like, a lot of people are really understanding and aware of it, so it's definitely really, really good to tell people. And it's not something to be like embarrassed or worried about. Like, once you tell people, I'm celiac, I can't eat gluten, so I need to be careful around food, please be aware of like cross-contamination, whether you're living at home or at work with these people. People are like really nice about it and really understanding. Honestly, I've never ever had any issues with that, but it's much easier to let people know so that they are aware, and then they kind of get excited too when they see something gluten-free. They might tell you about it, or like somewhere that was doing gluten-free things, so it kind of has some benefits in that way too. Okay, so I really hope that you liked my video, and I hope these 5 tips will help you so much. Again, this one was for celiac disease. I'm going to be doing a top 5 habits tips for type 1 diabetes. I just wanted them to have separate videos because they're both equally as important. If you did like this video, give it a thumbs up and leave me a comment down below if you are celiac and how you manage it and how you like this video. And if you're new here, remember to click subscribe. and I will see you all in next week's video.